Thank you everyone for having me. I'm very excited to be a part of this. Let me start by apologizing for the background. After about 30 years in this office, CPJ is moving in a week. So it's a bit crazy behind me, and again, I apologize for the craziness behind me. But on that note, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about CPJ and about the emergencies team here at CPJ. I won't go into it too long, but the idea was to just give you a broader notion of what we do, so that then you can maybe ask me more questions that are pertinent to you guys, because I don't think we have enough time to go into all the details of things that you could be doing. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the areas where we were focused this year, in an effort to explain to you a little bit more of where we're concerned. And then lastly, or not really lastly, but the meat of what I wanted to talk to you about was physical safety, and really go into how to think about risk and how to do risk assessments and psychological safety a little bit more. So I'll start by talking about CPJ and what we do here at the Committee to Protect Journalists. CPJ was founded in 1981 by a group of US journalists who met a Paraguayan journalist who was here visiting, and told him that he was sure that when he went back to Paraguay, he was going to be arrested, and sure enough, he was. So the journalist who he had met with decided to do something to help him, and decided that what they had at their disposal was journalism and the tools of journalism to help him. And they put together a campaign and got him released. So this is what we continue to do. We are primarily a research and advocacy organization where we use tools of journalism. So we report, we investigate, and we expose press freedom violations around the world. We also, other than documenting press freedom violations and denouncing them, we work, we spearhead and advise diplomatic efforts, and we work with other organizations to support journalists around the world. The Emergencies Department is a little bit weird in what we do here at CPJ. We were created in 2016 after the beheadings of US journalists in Syria, where we felt that we needed to do more than advocacy. We felt that our advocacy work was not enough with the changing landscape in which journalists were working. It was we felt that it was impossible to advocate with non-state actors like the Islamic State, or in other places in other parts of the world. In Mexico, for example, with the cartels, no amount of diplomatic work was going to be enough to help journalists. So we decided to create a department that was going to be more hands-on and was going to be able to provide journalists with additional support to help them be safe. So in terms of safety, we think about safety as two continuums. The first one is a continuum that goes from the very traditional physical safety, helmets, bulletproof vests, being in the front lines, thinking about whether you could be physically injured, to digital safety, digital security, and that's something that you're going to talk about separately. But we very much think of it as being engaged with physical security, and I can talk a little bit more about this. And the third component in our continuum would be psychological safety. And we include psychological safety here and refer to it as safety because we want to be thinking about it before we deploy, before we start reporting, before we start thinking about the stories that we're going to be reporting, about the assignment that we're going to go on. We want to be thinking about how this could affect us psychologically. So this brings me to our second continuum when we're thinking about safety, again, in the three buckets: physical, digital, and psychological, which are interconnected. We also want to be thinking about safety and about risk, and not something that only happens when you're in a war zone, when you're on the ground reporting, but it's something that you need to be thinking about and that you need to be assessing throughout the process of reporting, of investigating. So you want to be thinking about safety as you're thinking about pitching a story, as you're thinking about who you're going to talk to, who you're going to interview. And then you want to be reassessing that risk and rethinking about the different safety components as you are reporting the story, as you are on the ground, as you are investigating. And again, you want to be rethinking about risk in those three terms: physical, digital, and psychological, once you're done reporting, once you're done publishing, and the aftermath. And this is important, again, in the three buckets, because more and more what we're seeing is online threats, online harassment that may come after you've published the story, or often comes after you've published the story. But we're also seeing the impact psychologically that a story, that shooting photos, that editing photos can have in the aftermath of that story. So again, you want to be reassessing what your risk is and how you're going to respond to that risk throughout the process of reporting reporting a particular story. So with that in mind, the emergencies team has a bunch of resources available. We think, again, about safety from the beginning to the end. So we think we have resources that are pre-assignment and resources that are post-assignment or while you're reporting the story. In terms of safety and preemptive risk assessment and information, we have a series of products. We have a CPJ security guide that's very in-depth, and that's been translated into 12 languages. And because we know that not everyone necessarily is always going to go and read the whole thing, we've created this series of safety notes that are one-page notes that are very easy to follow. So with tactical information that prompts you to go deeper into something that might be of interest to you. So some examples of what we've done is war reporting, online harassment, online harassment safety notes, and some safety notes on how to remove your personal information from the internet. So this is some of the preemptive stuff that we're doing, along with the resource center that I see Pauline has shared there, where we share additional tools. So for example, where can you get training? Where can you find insurance? Where can you find personal protective equipment that you can rent? We also have a series of first aid videos that you can share, that you can watch. These are meant for people who have had already training and want to be reminded of it. But the idea is, again, that you can have them very handy on your phone, that you can have them on your computer and be able to rehash that training. And lastly, we do a series of safety advisories where when we see that a particular story is developing, I think the last one we did was yesterday or the day before, ahead of the upcoming elections in Algeria. We're looking at that as a potential crisis for journalists. So again, we've gone into very specific tactical information, again, in our three buckets that people can start reading and being informed about in order to think about the risk that they would face when reporting that story. And then the second component of what we do is post-incident support, and that's something that CPJ has been doing for a long time. It was formerly known as journalist assistance, and this is when a journalist is in trouble because of his or her reporting, we will step in. So we have emergency grants that we can give to cover lawyers, to cover other kind of legal work. We can help pay for seriously, for photocopies, for the lawyer's travel, anything around a legal concern. We can help pay for a lawyer. We can help pay for travel, for relocation, if it's necessary. A series of emergency response mechanisms for journalists who are in trouble around the world. The only thing that we're looking at is that the situation of distress is linked to their work, and that the person we're helping is a journalist. And in terms of that, we also partner with a bunch of other organizations around the world who do this kind of support. So if we're not able to give support, we will reach out to one of our partners who may be able to pick it up. And we do that through the Journalists in Distress network. So now I wanted to quickly take you through some of the focus of our work this year, and I hope that this kind of can inform you on where we're really concerned. So very broadly, we're doing a lot of election work, and we have an election-specific toolkit that goes a lot more in depth into the kind of preparations you need to be doing as a reporter, as a photographer, but also as an editor, and has a bunch of checklists you can follow. Pauline, I'm not sure I shared this with you, but I can share it once I'm done with the presentation. And we've done specific work in 3 elections, India, South Africa, and Guatemala, and we're preparing for the US 2020 election, again, to provide very specific information on how to stay safe to journalists covering these elections. The other 3 points that we've been covering this year, or the 3 generic hotspots, if you want to call them that, are photographers. We're concerned with photographers, and we have been developing tools that are specific to photographers. They're in the front lines. They're the ones that are most at risk. Often they can't report from a hotel room. So we've been working with photographers, and we've been working with women and gender non-conforming journalists in non-hostile environments, because we've also, through our research, identified them as being particularly vulnerable. And here we focused in the US and Canada. And we have, again, a bunch of information specific to, mostly to female journalists, including some information on how to think about sexual violence and to prevent sexualized attacks. And lastly, we've been working a lot around protests. And Pauline had asked me to think about what countries in the world are those that are most dangerous to journalists. And I can talk very, very briefly about our data, but the truth is that with the changing landscape, which is what the creation of the emergencies team was created to respond to, the frontline is no longer that traditional frontline that we used to think about. It's certainly, there's that war frontline, and there's certainly people reporting from an active war situation, but the frontline for journalists really is everywhere. And let me go back to the idea of working with female journalists in the US. That's a frontline. They're vulnerable all the time. They're being attacked all the time. They're being attacked online. They're being attacked while reporting on a beat like sports. So it's hard to think about what countries are the most dangerous for journalists. And again, in terms of that, I want to go back to protests. I'm sorry about being a little bit all over the place here, but we're seeing protests everywhere. And we're seeing journalists covering this protest everywhere. And that is a pretty dangerous situation. Again, in terms of all the 3 buckets, there's a digital component to covering protests. There's a physical component. What kind of personal protective equipment is the appropriate one to bring to a particular protest or rally? And it's going to change whether you're covering protests in Colombia, whether you're covering them in Bolivia, whether you're covering them in Iraq, or whether you're covering them in Hong Kong. So this actually brings me to another point I wanted to make, and that's on how to think about risk. And this is really kind of where I wanted to delve in with you guys. Again, because frontlines for us can be anywhere. It's about tackling risk and thinking about risk as a really core component of the work that you're doing. So the ways in which we like to think about risk is what is the identity of the reporter, the photographer, really, or the identity of the different team members that are going to go report on a story. And how does that change the risk to the story? So in terms of identity, we think about gender, we think about ethnicity, we think about the journalistic background of the team members or the reporter. For example, again, to go back to the sports example, have you reported about a particular team in the past, and could that put you in a different kind of risk situation if you're going to go report on that team again, and fans might be displeased with your work? So gender is, identity is the first thing that we think about when we're thinking about risk. The second thing that we want to be thinking about when we're thinking about risk, and again, focusing on physical if you want, but always keeping in mind the other two buckets is what is the story that you're reporting. So different stories have different risk levels, but I'm going to say that you want to be thinking about risk whenever you're reporting on anything. So are you reporting on conflict? That's going to have a certain kind of risk that you're going to be thinking about. And again, I'm sorry for bringing this up, but are there going to be bombs? Are there going to be mines? What kind of ballistics being used? What is the positioning of the zone that you're going to be in? Or are you reporting on a criminal element, and what is that going to look like? You know, is there a chance that they're also weapons? Is there a chance of a hostage situation if you're reporting on a criminal element? Or are you reporting on corruption, and what's the risk? What's your physical risk when you're reporting on corruption? So again, so far we've thought about identity, the story, and then the last point that you want to be thinking about when thinking about risk is the geography, the place. Where are you going? Are you going somewhere? So are you going to be somewhere where there's access to medical training, to medical support? Are you going to be somewhere where the roads are particularly dangerous to travel through? Are you going to be somewhere where you won't be able to be easily evacuated? And how does that change the risk that you're going to face when reporting on that particular story? So once you've thought about those three components of risk, you want to be thinking about your risk assessment. And you know, at times I feel like the risk assessment can seem a little bit outdated, or it can seem like something that's another layer of bureaucracy that you want to do, but there are different ways of doing a risk assessment and following a checklist, and we have those checklists available on our website. But a written risk assessment is important so that you create a document that you can go back to. And in creating that written document, you also want to be having a conversation. And I would actually stress that the conversation and the discussion may be even more important. And that conversation needs to be happening between the different members of the team that's working. So a photographer, a reporter, a camera person, but also between whoever's reporting the story, and that might be one person who's doing the whole reporting, and the editor. And I want to stress the importance of having the editor involved in thinking about risk and in discussing that risk with their reporters or their photographers, because it's really important that the editor also know and be able to advise the reporter on what the risk is and whether is the story worth the kind of risk that you're looking at. That would be the first part of the conversation. The second part of the conversation, and where it is good to have that in writing, is what happens if something goes wrong. So when you're doing a risk assessment, again, you're thinking about what the risk is and what the mitigation would be. And then thirdly, what your emergency response to that risk would be. So for example, risk would be disease. You're going somewhere where you're going to be vulnerable to malaria. So risk mitigation would be thinking ahead of time about what medicine you need to bring with you. And I'm sorry for the very, very simplistic example, but it's a good one. And then the emergency response that you need to be discussing with anyone involved in the story, your team members, your editor, is what happens if you actually do get sick and need to get to a hospital, need to be evacuated to a hospital. What are the phone calls you're going to make? Who are the people who are going to help you make that happen? These are all conversations that you want to be having ahead of time, so that when you're in that moment, that the explosive moment, you know what you need to be doing. And then the last thing, and I'm mindful of the time, so I'm trying to run through this, but the last thing that you want to be including when you're thinking about risk is a communications plan. And that's how are you going to be communicating amongst each other, members of the team, with your home base, with your editor, whether you're whether we're talking about a freelancer or a staffer, that communication needs to be happening, and you need to make sure that there is an agreed upon check-in, so that you know that things are okay, so that you know that there's no need to go into that emergency response moment, or that you know that somebody missed the check-in or somebody checked in to say something was wrong, so you need to be working on that response to the situation. So you know, another possibility would be crossing a border. Somebody, your reporter is going to cross a border. They were supposed to let you know before they crossed the border, after you cross the border, because there was a risk of arrest. So they checked in before the border, and then you don't spend 2 hours and you haven't heard again, but you've gone through the process of risk assessment. So you know that you have identified a lawyer on the other side of the border who you can call, who would be able to respond in that situation. And here, let me put a little asterisk, and let you know that this all seems daunting, but again, there are a lot of resources that you can reach through us and through other members of the Journalists in Distress group. And for example, lawyers and networks of lawyers are something that we could help with, and that there are organizations that specialize in that. So, so there are ways of using those networks that are in place for you to be able to properly have risk mitigation processes in place. And because we don't have that much time, I still did want to hit the psychological safety component, and again emphasize how important it is to risk and how important it is to being safe. One example that somebody gave me that was very clear was a war photographer who had been covering a lot of the more recent conflict zones in the Middle East. Had been in Libya, probably had been in Egypt, and then went into Syria. And then there were a lot of mistakes that were made because that person was not, you know, was not in the right place to make decisions. And those bad decisions that they were making were affecting the rest of the team's physical security. So there it was about, again, about safety and about thinking about it again. So what can you do preemptively in terms of psychological safety? The main thing is talking about it. Again, it's that discussion, and again, creating those conversations, not making sure that those conversations are not taboo, so that in the newsroom, you're talking about trauma, you're talking about the way that a story has affected you, and it just becomes something natural that editors are encouraging their reporters to talk about, that reporters are talking about amongst each other, so that when somebody is affected, they can say that they feel like it's too much, that maybe that next story is something they're not comfortable with, and they won't be punished for not being able to take on that story. But in terms of having that conversation and being aware of it, maybe that person's not aware that they've been affected, but colleagues have a couple of tips and have a couple of pointers to look for, and to be able to say, hey, I think you need to rethink this thing. So some of we have a safety note. It's pretty basic, but it gives you some of the basic information. So some of the things that you want to be looking for are difficulties concentrating, unusual irritability or short temper, images or thoughts related to a project intruding at unwanted times, unusual isolation or withdrawal from peer groups or social situations, disruption of sleep, and increasing self-medication. So these are just very basic things that you can be looking out for yourself, you can be looking out for colleagues, and having that conversation. And we encourage people to ask about that as part of the risk assessment. Is there any way that the previous work that you've done could affect the way that you're thinking about this story, and could affect the way that you're going to be engaging with this story? Again, we have a bunch of resources available through our network. We work closely with the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma, and they have incredible resources. But we have networks of providers that we can tap, and we can provide emergency grants for anybody who would like to access those providers. So very quickly, that was my super fast spiel about risk assessment and thinking about psychological safety. Pauline, I did have some numbers if you wanted me to go through according to CPJ data, what in 2018 were the places where most journalists were in prison, where most journalists were killed. Our tallies for 2019 are coming out later this month, so what I can give you is, again, what we had from 2018. Let me know if that's something that you guys are interested in.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
So as of December 31st, again, of 2018, there were 251 journalists behind bars around the world. I think, so the top 3 countries were Turkey, China, and Egypt. And what I think is more interesting is that about 70% of journalists who were behind bars last year had been in prison on anti-state charges. And in 2018, we saw a significant increase of people being charged with fake news. In 2018, there were 54 journalists who were killed. The deadliest countries that year, which are not going to be the same this year, but last year, were Afghanistan, Syria, India, Mexico, and the US because of the Capital Gazette newsroom shooting. And worth noting also were the very high-profile cases in 2018 of Jamal Khashoggi, Jan Kuciak in Slovakia, and of course the Capital Gazette reporters. And all in all, about over 1,300 journalists have been killed in direct retaliation for the reporting since we began tracking these numbers. In about 9 of 10 cases of journalists who have been murdered, there is complete impunity. That means that the shooters and the masterminds have gone free. There's been no one made responsible for their killings. And this climate of impunity, we believe, just encourages or allows people to think that they can get away with the worst kind of censorship. So again, I feel like I sped through that, but I'm eager to hear what questions you guys may have.
Obviously, there are not too many questions from the participants, but I prepared some. I think you have, I don't know, to allow me to put my video on again. And to make me,
okay,
yeah,
you're going to have to help me with that.
to make me a host again.
Okay.
It's not that.
Oh, I think I can do it.
Yeah.
Important
Sorry,
guys.
to see me, but it's even more kind to see and to hear me.
I know, I can't, it's not letting me.
No.
Oh, here we go.
Okay. Cool. Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, so I would suggest to talk a little bit deeper about physical safety and also about psychological safety. So you mentioned the most dangerous regions and countries for journalists. And one practical question, you already mentioned that, but I would ask you again, because it's really important for some of our media startups. If one of their colleagues, one of the reporters is being arrested, for example, let's say in whatever, Indonesia, and it's a small media enterprise, so there are about 20 to 30 people working there. They have not that much money for lawyers, for example, or the budget all in all is pretty tiny. So what can they do concretely? They can write you, for example, and ask for a lawyer.
That would be the first step for sure.
Okay.
to write us, and if they're in Indonesia, I would put them in touch as well with our Asia team that has an incredible network in the region. But the first step, yes, would be to alert us, and we can decide then whether, and I'm speaking from CPJ's perspective, but whether an advocacy campaign would be useful. Oftentimes we find that international pressure will be enough to push for the release of that journalist. If it isn't enough, then we can work with our legal partners at finding a lawyer, and we can work at, again, you said if the outlet does not have enough money to cover legal charges or legal expenses, that is something that would be very, very easy for our network to find the funds to cover the lawyer and any other expenses that would be related to the legal process, including at times, I wanted to bring this up, but it's pretty crazy. We end up covering the expenses for travel for either the family, colleagues, or the lawyer to the prison, to the court hearings, which often is something that the outlet or the journalist can't cover.
Okay. And would it be useful also at the same time to raise awareness via social media?
Yes,
so
absolutely. And we
that
again have
what
found
they can also do on their own.
yes,
Yeah.
social media, and that's something that we can also help with.
Mm-hmm.
That if you reach out, we can help with the campaigning, and there are other partners that can support in terms of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But let me go back to, I know I sound like a broken record, but if you're doing if you know that a particular story may lead to a legal threat, to an arrest, while you're reporting the story, I would encourage to start thinking about what that legal threat is and reach out to us or look at potential lawyers on the ground that might help, so that you've identified who could help ahead of something happening. Because the faster you move, the easier it is. And if you already have those connections set up, it'll be a lot easier than doing them ad hoc as something bad is happening.
That's the reason why the risk assessment is so important.
Exactly.
Yeah, before you're
it helps
going
you think
out
while your head's cool.
in the field. Okay, and I saw on your website a chapter called Legal Support and also Prison Support. Perhaps you can tell a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends. And just like the risk assessment, a particular situation is also, each situation is different. Prison support is what we do is mostly financial. So it is what I was talking about. We can help cover a lot of expenses, including, again, like the visits. We pay for basic needs inside prison for some people. So we can cover, for example, the cost of bringing food, bringing medicine, bringing basic supplies like mattresses or sheets. We that can be done, or paying for a private doctor who could come in and see the journalist who's in prison. But most often, what we help support is visits and making sure that lawyers, family, colleagues have access to the person who's in prison, and that's the brunt of our prison support. In terms of legal support, I mean, there's so many things. It would depend on what it would be. We could help take the, depending on where the case is, we could help find a lawyer on the ground for immediate support. We could do a lot of international advocacy. We could help bring the case to an international court. We could help bring an international lawyer who could advise the local lawyer. There's a bazillion things depending on what the legal need is that we could be helping with.
How many people do work at the Committee to Protect Journalists?
Overall, we're 40 people, I think.
Mm-hmm. And
in my team, we are, I'm counting. There are 4 people in London and 2 people here in New York.
Okay. And you are financed by donations?
We're financed by foundations, media, and independent donations. We do not take any government money, which allows us to really be independent.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when we are, like, our participants seems to be a little bit lazy in terms of asking questions. For what reason, I don't know. But I will ask you some more questions. I would be interested in terms of psychological safety. What would you say? What can be done for staying mentally secure even in difficult situations? Are there
Sorry, what do you mean?
Are there any concrete tips to stay mentally secure even if there are stressful situations when you're reporting around the world?
Well, again, I think the main thing is taking the taboo away from psychological safety, and again, that's why we like to think about it as safety and not as as a like as a disease, if you want. It's something that you can be tackling preventative, and it's something that you need to be thinking about in the same way that you're thinking about your physical safety or digital safety. So having those conversations, making it part of your risk assessment. So asking that question routinely, and talking about how you feel. Something else that's really useful is a post-assignment debrief. So again, making this routine, take 10 minutes with an editor, with whoever is in the newsroom who can do it, to debrief about not only how you feel, but like, how did this work? Would you have done this differently? How did this affect you? Just to talk about about the story and your general risk assessment, safety assessment for that story, including a couple of questions about psychological safety. I honestly have found that it seems to be a generational thing. I find that younger reporters are a lot more willing to talk about this, but of course there's a bunch of cultural hurdles as well, and there are places where it's harder to have this conversation, where it's harder within that culture to have that conversation. So again, if you can make it be part of that general risk assessment, it might be easier and feel less of a targeted question.
So now we have 2 questions by the participants. And okay, we have the question from Luisa. Is there some kind of guide for mental health resources in different countries that
well,
you know about?
I would 100% point you all towards the DART Center.
Yeah. I already wrote also
it
the
is
link
it
into
is
the chat
the best place to find mental health resources. They do a lot of training as well, and the DART Center, though it's I don't know if headquarters is the right word, but the main office is here in New York, but there are Asia Pacific offices, there's a Europe office, and there's been a lot of work done also in Latin America and the Middle East. And then there are other organizations that do super interesting stuff that might be worth checking out, in case you're not aware of them. But IREX has a project called SAFE, I can't not remember what it stands for, but it's SAFE. And SAFE has offices in Central America. I want to say it's in Honduras, in Kenya, and in Tbilisi. And they do amazing training that incorporates, it's hands-on, couple of days, and it incorporates psychosocial safety within a general framework of safety, again, with the 2 other buckets. And those are very, very culturally receptive programs with trainers that are local.
Okay. Petra is asking, what do you expect media houses to do in general that the journalists working for them feel safe?
Well, the first thing I think would be having those conversations and having protocols in place. I think you were sharing, I shared with you the ACOS
I also shared it. Yeah.
So I didn't talk about this, and I don't know if everyone knows about this, but the ACOS Alliance, which stands for A Culture of Safety, is an alliance of organizations like CPJ, media outlets, and freelance journalists. It was originally created to support freelance journalists, but it's doing a lot of work with local journalists and outlets as well. Anyway, ACOS has a ton of really useful safety resources as well. They provide free training, and they have created as well some documents that are for media houses, that are for editors, to help think about how to create a safety protocol and how to self-evaluate the work that the safety work that you put in place for your reporters. they also host some editor trainings. And again, that's meant to inform the newsroom in general about how to think about safety. Because the way I always quote her, the ACO's executive director, but she has a great line, which is, we can train all the journalists we want, but if we're not training editors, then it's all going to waste. Because again, the core of thinking about safety and thinking about risk is to be able to have that conversation and to be able to make sure that that on both sides of the table, on both sides of the email, phone, whatever, people are aware of the questions to ask and the protocols to follow. So again, I think that's making sure that editors are aware, are trained, and are literate in safety resources would be crucial. And then, you know, it depends on the size of a media house, what you can do, and what protocols you can develop. But really basic risk assessment protocols and other kinds of emergency protocols are free. And it only takes, you know, carving out the time to be able to put those in place and to, you know, do some exercises.
Okay, there's a question by Barbie. For some security risk, very difficult or no way to ask help from police for our safety in Myanmar. Please, could you share some experiences from other countries?
Can you read it again?
Yeah.
Sorry.
For some security risk, very difficult or no way to ask help from police for our safety in Myanmar. So please, could you share some experiences from other countries?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, again, and yes, I think it again depends, and my answer would be having protocols and having risk assessments in place, and knowing who your allies are, and knowing where the risk is in a situation like that, where the police would fall on the side of the riskier actors or the potential threats. That's how you need to be thinking about them. But then you can, in that way, when you're thinking about risk there and you're thinking about mitigation, you can think of who your allies are. So, for example, to think of a specific country example, in El Salvador, I've spoken to a lot of investigative reporters who, ahead of going in to cover you know, a criminal story where there's also police implication, what they'll do is they'll reach out to community leaders, or even, you know, the gang leaders or whoever they know who could be friendly, and allow for an evacuation, allow them to understand what the situation is and how they can be safe. So I think in places where the, you know, the normative safety resources are not in place, what you need to do is be creative, and again, use your own reporting and your own sources to figure out who can be an ally and who can help you to get out. Now, if you're concerned about legality again, I would encourage you to reach out, and we could talk about, for Myanmar, I think there's a lot of international lawyers who could provide some background and who could help you think about some mitigation.
Natalia is asking, what would be the actions in case a journalist's phone conversations were intercepted?
I mean, I think the answer there, that answer may be more for the digital component of the training. But if your conversations are intercepted, I think the short answer is once they've been intercepted, it's an issue. I mean, there's very little you can do post incident, but you can have very good digital hygiene, and that's, with a lot of digital things, I think the main thing is preventative and thinking about how to keep your information, keep your devices safe and clean. And I think you guys are probably going to touch on this in the next component.
Yeah, about
that said,
security.
Most security experts will tell you that it's not that common for phone communications to be intercepted. So again, it's about hygiene and knowing exactly the level of threat.
So we have about 6-7 minutes for more questions, and I would be really interested in what are the main steps when reporters come back from their research and got a trauma? So what would you say, like, you already mentioned the DART Center, that would be the right organization to contact, but is there anything that I can
I mean,
do
the
at
first
once
step,
as a colleague or editorial department?
yeah, I think the first step again is having that, making these things routine, making them just a checkup, so that you come back, we check in, we talk about what your story was, and we talk about how you're feeling. And they're very basic questions that you ask every time. And then colleagues are also educated on how to be able to read symptoms and be able to point people in the right direction. I think this is something that most outlets are struggling with, except very, very large outlets that are capable of having in-house support.
Mm-hmm.
That said, if you are, if you're feeling, if a reporter's feeling affected, if you see that a colleague is feeling affected, yes, the DART Center is a good place to go for resources on some self-care you can do, and it's making sure that you have social contact, not isolating yourself, making sure that you can have that support, or that you can provide a support for a colleague who is going through that. Making sure that you can schedule some time to regroup, to re-energize, and that it's okay to take a step back, to relax, and then to think about things and feel okay again. But in terms of, PTSD and trauma, which are pretty severe diagnoses, we also, through a bunch of mental health providers, are working on creating a network, but we often can find people who can, medical providers or psychological providers who can provide that support, and we can pay for it. And in places where it's not, where it's harder to do, we can also help find people who could do it via Skype. That's a little bit touchier, because it depends on the place where the provider is and on the place where the reporter is and what kind of liability issues there are. But there are ways of finding and anonymizing that support, because again, as we discussed earlier, it depends on the cultural background and the weight of seeking psychological help.
Okay, there's no other question from the audience. What would be interesting thing, according to my point of view, is you've been working for the Committee to Protect Journalists for a couple of years.
Many years. I saw Nadine is part of the conversation too, and she and I have been working, 15 years.
Oh, so and now you mentioned you do have a staff of about 40 people.
Right.
So is it right that the situation is getting worse, so that you have to, hire more and more people to cover all the threats that are journalists facing all around the world?
I mean, I will say that it's never been so dangerous to be a journalist around the world.
Yeah.
Again, we had to create a whole new department to be able to respond to the kind of threat that we're seeing. I'd say it's in response to many, many things, but the changing media landscape, shrinking newsrooms, newsrooms needing to rely more and more on freelancers, shrinking resources, which mean that the first thing you are likely to cut is security or safety personnel or resources. But also, I think something important, and that will be a good lead to your next session, is the digital revolution has really changed the way we're doing journalism, right? Anyone can do journalism. Anyone with a good smartphone can go out and take a photo, can go out and do a recording, and then can upload it to social media, to whatever. So there's a lack also of training in many ways of people who are doing journalism, but it also has created a bunch of different risks. So there's the digital risk that you're going to talk about, obviously, but also, again, to go back to the first thing that I talked about, it's groups like the Islamic State or groups like the Cartel de Sinaloa in Mexico no longer need journalists, right? Because they have access to their own social media accounts. They have access of a way to having direct control over the story that they're telling about themselves. So the role of the journalist has changed. and that has made journalists more vulnerable. They're no longer a neutral observer who can help you tell your story, who can help guide the way that you know, the story or the situation's being understood. Journalists have become pawns in a different way that can be used for political gain, that can be used for many other things. And again, this makes them incredibly vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. For example, in Germany, there have been attacks towards journalists who've been, you know, unimaginable a couple of years ago. Like this year and also last year, the journalists are attacked on streets while demonstrations are going on, for example.
Exactly, and I also, the fact that my team is gearing up to provide support to journalists covering the U.S. election. That we are sincerely concerned about all the different levels of threats to journalists who will be reporting on this election. I think that really, you know, I mean, and that brings another component of the threat to journalists, which is the rhetoric from at the international level from politicians about journalists, about fake news, about, you know, journalists being the enemy. So it's really an environment, we're really operating in an environment in which attacks are coming in every direction, and it can be exhausting, speaking of psychosocial health and safety, to be so vigilant and to be thinking about the many ways in which a journalist can be attacked for reporting a really simple story.
Super. Okay. There are no questions from the audience, obviously. So I would say thank you very much to Maria.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for your time, for your insights, for your useful links, for the security guide and all the other stuff.
And please share my info with everyone, and feel free to reach out whenever.
Right. And now I would like to invite Daniel Moßbrucker to our discussion. I hope that this will work out.
Okay, I'm gonna sign off then.
Sure. Yeah. And now he can tell us more about.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yeah, about digital security. And
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Daniel. Right now, you just have to put on your video if this is possible. Yeah, here we go. And now you can also share your screen with us.
As we trained last week.
We made a technical test. Yeah, I would like to introduce Daniel Moßbrucker to you. As I already mentioned, he is expert in digital security, and he will tell us right now for about 15 minutes what should be considered if you're connected online. He also prepared some really practical tips. And after the 15 minutes of a presentation, we have time for discussion, another 10 to 15 minutes. So we are really glad having you, Daniel, with us. And now this is your stage. Thank you.
Okay, you do see my slides and you do see me?
Everything is working out.
Cool.
Perfect.
The connection's fine.
Thank you. Super.
Okay. Great. First of all, thanks also for the previous session. Super interesting, and I can only support all what was said when it came to digital security. I think the major points were like risk assessment, plus don't consider either physical or digital safety as an isolated island somewhere, but there are, as digital technology is related to everything in our world now, these two bubbles, physical versus digital, are not two different things, but they are one. However, of course, there are some things we could specifically talk about digital security, and this is what I try to do today. So yeah, I was asked to talk about digital security in 15 minutes, and what I would like to say at the very beginning is that this is not possible. So please do not think that it's that easy. But what I can tell you is digital security every second day, 15 minutes would be super cool, because this was what it should be about. It should be about a behavioral change. the bottom line of today, because I can only give you like a very, very brief overview today, the bottom line should be, it's not so much about tools, it is about behavior. If you change your behavior, everything will follow automatically. So what I hope today is to encourage you to change a little bit your behavior, and this is what is directly connected what was said before. Please start thinking about digital security from your threats rather than from tools. I will very, very briefly talk about threat modeling, which is just another term for risk assessment. And yes, of course, as you all expect, like basic tips or like what are the most important things. Yeah, I have brought like 5 things you should do. I'm working on this with journalists for 7 years now, among others with Reporters Without Borders for 3 years. Yeah, giving trainings mostly in Europe. Yeah, I will just tell you like what is really, really essential. More unfortunately is not possible in 15 minutes, but at least that. So starting with the second bullet points, okay, what does it concretely mean? Start thinking from your threats rather than from tools. A threat model, the term, I wrote it down as well, individual risk assessment, so I don't want to talk too much about it now. However, the term threat model is for people working with software development quite familiar, because if you develop with software, that's what you always do. You always mostly already at the beginning of writing code, you think, okay, is it possible to hack our software? Is it possible to circumvent our security measures? And what is very important is that we also, as journalists, do this kind of threat modeling when we think about digital security. A lot of times there are participants in my workshops saying like, okay, Daniel, and today is the day, and I finally would like to learn what end-to-end encryption for my emails is. And then I always ask, okay, but why? Why do you want to do that? And mostly the answer is like, because I think it's interesting, because I always wanted to do that. But the answer is mostly never, because I really think that this is a need for me. And this is what I always like to change, that we start thinking from threats. What does it mean? What is a threat model? It starts a little bit with like, okay, who am I? Which means just, okay, what are we working? What are our workflows? Where do we produce data? Where do we have contacts? What are our sources? To make an estimation of your environment and of yourself, so that you really understand, okay, what is at risk. And the process of threat modeling is then really like thinking, okay, we have these kinds of data. Do we want to protect them? Against whom? So first of all, you have then to decide, okay, what do I want to protect? Secondly, who are my adversaries? Thirdly, are my adversaries able to succeed? Trolls on the internet might want to intercept your phone calls, but they're technically probably not able to do that. So you don't have to worry about that, and you can use the phone calls. Something like that. So threat modeling helps you to know where to start and to prioritize. And this is what the fourth question is about. Like, okay, how likely is that? Probably like no one is perfect. I'm pretty sure that, I don't know, the NSA is probably able to hack my computer, although I'm probably like more than the average prepared against such an attack, have more awareness, have more knowledge, just because I deal with that every day. However, I know that there are adversaries out there who will be able to hack me. But I think, and I hope, that it's quite unlikely that they do that, just because it's like unrealistic that they spend resources on me. And the same is true for you. We all have plenty of adversaries, but are they really able to succeed? And how likely is that? And what needs to have the highest priorities? The end, after you do that, this is like, you can do that in charts or something, is a threat model. And then we talk about tools. Then if we identify, oh fuck, really our emails are at risk because, I don't know, we are at our national email provider and the state, which is our biggest enemy, has legal access to that. Oh yeah, then you do have to think about end-to-end encryption for your emails. But if you use an email provider that is based somewhere else in your state, which is your biggest adversary, does not have any access, neither technically or legally, then it's probably fine to use the email provider just like that. And you should think about other things then. What I just discussed now will be released as a guide quite soon by DW Akademie, and I'm very sure that Paulina will share this then also with you. It will be a hands-on guide which should help organizations, media organizations, and organizations of the development cooperation to go through that process. Again, I can only be very, very fast today, but this is kind of not that hard to do as it may sound now. And what we did is we consulted a lot of stakeholders and made a guide about how to do such a threat model for an organization to then know at the end, okay, what are our threats and what do we have to do now? This will be released in the first half of 2020. And I worked on it a lot in the last year, and we will release it soon. Right, I skipped that. Okay, and if you ask me now, okay, what are the core priorities for journalists? I counted it recently. I think I trained in my life so far around 700 journalists and did risk assessments with them. And I think the biggest amount of homework, so to say, is for the whole area of account security, means prevention against hacking, do not click on phishing links, basically secure your Facebook, Twitter, email accounts, because this is what the most of our adversaries are somehow able to go for our information. And under account security, I would say three things are important. First one, probably no one wants to hear that now, but I have to say that, I'm sorry, passwords. Passwords are still the entrance for a lot of services, both for us and for our adversaries. So please don't be too lazy and have a strong password, which means like 12 characters. And as a thumb rule, you can think like length is more important than complexity. So it's better to have a 16 characters long password that might not involve, I don't know, special characters or something, rather than having like only 4 digits, but super complex. Mathematically, the length is more important than complexity. However, I have to say that now as well, as it's like a teacher, only a length and a long and complex password is really safe. But please today don't have more than less than 12 characters. And due to database hacks and phishing attacks, a password should only be used once. Why that? Why do you always hear this tip like only use it once? Just because imagine you make everything right, but a service that stores your password got hacked, and you are one of the customers. It happened, for example, in the year 2013, I think, with Adobe. And then like millions of customers who had like, I don't know, an account at Adobe Reader or something like that, their passwords were on the internet. And if an adversary now goes through this and tries to find out, okay, with that email address and with that password that this person used at Adobe, is it also possible to log into Twitter? Oh, yes, it is. And then it's kind of easy. That's why you shouldn't use a password twice. Only have a password once. This is, I know, quite unrealistic if you try to remember all of the passwords. An average person today has 60 to 70 online accounts. That's why, sorry, this is just a website where you can check whether your accounts got hacked already. Just type into a search engine HPI identity leak checker. They send you an email and informing you, okay, are your account information in a database or not? Yeah, and what I wanted to say was like password manager. So as you are asked to use a different password everywhere, please use a password manager. What is a password manager? Basically just that, what you see here. This is the provider NPass. It's basically, yeah, like a telephone book for your passwords, and you unlock it with the master password. These services become more and more convenient. The good thing for you is you only have to remember one master password. This needs to be strong. Please write that down somewhere, because if you forget this master password, you will lose access to all your passwords. But just write that down in a safe place, I don't know, at home or wherever it is safe. And then have that. There are also apps for that to use it simultaneously on the smartphone. A lot of these services have an autofill in, so they all, you just have to open Amazon and go to the login, and then automatically the password manager sees, oh, okay, we need now these credentials, and they fill it up. So these password managers are super, super important. If you ask me, okay, what was from the 5 tips I will give you, what is the most important thing? It is a password manager. Use them. Please start doing that if you're not already doing that. Secondly, prevention of phishing. Phishing means you click on a link and you think you are at Google, but you're not at Google, but you type in your login credentials. But in reality, you are on a page of a criminal, and you give directly for the criminal your login credentials. This is quite old. This is a super old tactic, and it's not very, like, for people like me working in security, it's honestly a bit boring because yeah, it's so easy. However, it's still the #1 threat that is done. Clicking on suspicious link, opening malicious attachments at an email, typing your credentials into a PayPal site which is not PayPal. This is still the #1 gateway to your accounts for criminals. I hope that Paulina will share my slides afterwards. That's why here you see what phishing is, and here you see the most important things. What I can just recommend you is do quizzes about phishing. So my favorite at the moment is that you see the link here. There you can click and you see examples. You can investigate them, and at the end you have to say, okay, is this legitimate or not? And this is really like a very good training. I do it a lot in my trainings, so that you just start thinking about it and become like more aware that phishing is a thing. Third step is multi-factor authentication, or two-step authentication, 2FA. This is basically just means after you typed in a password, please also give a second factor. For example, there are different ones, like passwords is mostly the first one, and then there are like these processing factors. For example, a security key. A security key is like a USB stick, and you have to register that, and you have to then plug it in when you log in. Why is that important? Imagine you are now an adversary and they have your password. Shit happens. Okay, they do have it. But then they would be asked to also provide that key. And this key you can't like type in, you need to have it in your hand. And you're the only person who has it in your hand. That's why these things are super, super strong. They become more and more common. You can register one key for multiple services, so you can have this one key for Facebook, Twitter, Gmail, PayPal, whatever, and you can just put it on your regular keychain. And with that, I would say 99.9% of all the attacks that are possible, all the remote attacks for your online accounts are not successful, I would say. Yeah. I don't have any more time, but I take myself 3 more minutes. Fourth thing, after the accounts, there are 2 big topics, also scientifically, about like security, digital security. The fourth thing is like secure communication. So we talk a lot about encryption. Just a few basic tips. Avoid old technology like telephone or SMS. This is not cool. It's super old. States can intercept it like how they want. Don't do it. Try to switch as much as possible to like online based things like messengers, and have a look on end-to-end encrypted channels. Yeah. And here, please have a look whether these services are open source. For example, Signal or Wire or whatever. WhatsApp, for example, is also end-to-end encrypted, and it's better than its reputation. However, WhatsApp is not open source, and we have to trust on the service whether they really do what they claim to do. And just a thing that we again and again observe that causes problems: delete your messages constantly. And this is now again something. Why do I say this? Just because imagine you're crossing the border and you are in an airport, and you are then forced from one to the other minute to open your smartphone, and that they want to go to your chats. If your chats are not completely empty, but I don't know, at Signal Messenger, for example, you can say, okay, after 7 days, after 1 week, the messages should just be deleted. What is not there cannot be investigated. And this is now hopefully one of the many things where you see how much digital and physical security is interrelated with each other. And we see always again and again that these like minor things, it sounds like a detail, but these like tiny things often make a difference whether there's a security incident or not. Last thing, try to hide yourself. I don't want to say anonymize, which is a real challenge if you really would like to be anonymous. But try to don't leave data on every corner of the internet. And a very helpful tool are VPNs. And I just wrote down here a few key questions. I would like to say 3 things about it. Think about the jurisdiction. So it's probably not a very good idea if you're based, for example, for me, I'm in Germany, and I do cover as a journalist something about intelligence agencies in Germany. So the German state is somehow my adversary in my threat model. It wouldn't make sense to use a VPN provider based in Germany just because this VPN provider based in Germany would legally be forced to maybe reveal data about me against my core enemy. That's why for me, it would probably be good to, I don't know, use a VPN provider in a very different country than Germany. That does not cooperate with the German government. So jurisdiction matters a lot when it's about VPN providers. Secondly, please have a look whether this provider has a no-log policy and is open source. Again, and thirdly, please do not use free of charge VPN providers. If a VPN provider is free of money, it is not free of charge. You pay with your data. They lock you and they sell these data. There's no reason for someone in the internet to just provide a VPN provider for free. So what you then do in reality is you may use this VPN provider, but be aware this VPN provider knows everything about you, everything. So if you really want to use the VPN to like hide yourself on the internet, pay a few like dollars or euros or wherever you are. There are also like support programs for at different providers like Proton VPN or NordVPN. This is what I'm aware of, where you can very for very, very few money, or maybe even for free when you're a journalist, apply for this program and you get a strong VPN that fulfills all these characteristics I just pointed out for free. All right, this is it. It was more than 50 minutes, it was 21, but I hope it was a little bit helpful.
Yeah, I think this was super helpful. You have to put me as a host again, Daniel.
Okay, I do that how? Teilnehmer verwalten?
Yeah.
Ja.
Yeah, genau. Here we go. Okay, super. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So VPN does mean, I just had to look at that. Virtual private network. Right.
Yeah, it's just a thing you put between yourself and, let's say, Google, or I don't know. And for Google, it would look like, okay, not me as Daniel is looking something up, but this VPN provider is looking something up. And for my ISP, for example, Vodafone here in Germany, they would only see, okay, Daniel is connected to a VPN.
You don't have to share your screen anymore, so you can stop that if you want.
Mm-hmm.
And just put on your video, I hope,
mm-hmm.
and your microphone, so
but
that
I don't
we
share
can
it anymore. I don't share my screen anymore.
Yeah, and now put you on your video.
I cannot start my video because the moderator stopped it. This is what it says.
Yeah, super, super, super. Then let's do it like that. Try to start again, so that we can discuss it another 10 minutes.
Yeah.
There was a question by Lina, who would like to know, what password manager could you recommend? And your video again on.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. Good.
This is kind of a religious question.
Okay.
I really have to say that there are, like, in the digital security community, there are, I don't want to use the word war, but there are real battles.
Okay.
That's why I'm a bit hesitant to recommend one, but very, very typical ones that are more or less, and now you say that I don't have anything to do with them, I'm not paid for them, like they are more or less the same. Of course, every key password manager claims to be the best one. They're more or less the same. KeePass, 1Password, LastPass, and NPass. These are like the most important one. I think more important than the name is, please have a look whether these password managers are open source. Open source means that the source code, so how the program works in every detail, is freely available. And this matters because we don't have to trust them that everything is fine, but like security research can really go through all the lines and see, okay, is everything fine? Is it the latest security standards, or is something fishy going on here? And this is very, very important. And my last point to that, a general decision you have to make them as a user is, do I want to have an offline or an online manager? An offline manager means, okay, everything is stored only on your computer. And of course, this is good because your passwords are only on your computer and not somewhere in any cloud where you don't have access to. But it's not that convenient because most of us do have, like, first a smartphone, then a computer, maybe even a tablet. So we would like to share the passwords, and then a cloud is needed. So this is a general thing. The tendency is more and more that we use online-based password managers, which is not by default bad, but you really have to think then about a strong master password.
Okay. There are no other questions right now in the chat window. We have another 5 minutes. So if you do have 1-2 questions, please write them down in the chat window so I can ask Daniel before we are finishing this third webinar session. But I would like to know, Daniel, what do you think? Do you think that journalists in general do care enough about digital security?
No.
No.
Clear answer. My general observation is that journalists are, of course, just humans. They are mostly as good as the general society. There are always exemptions, but in both ways. There are these, of course, super sophisticated investigative reporters that do mostly everything right. But I also honestly trained people who came from war zones, and I worked with them, and it's like, okay, how could you survive in the last month? And then we did find out, okay, yeah, you got hacked and you didn't realize that your phones were intercepted, and we know it only now. All your emails, all your thousands of emails were downloaded from an unknown adversary 3 months ago, and you weren't aware of it. So journalists are normal, and the unfortunate thing, and this is general about security, you only know that you need it when it's too late. And mostly I am called, okay, our organization got hacked, all the data is lost, can you help us now? Of course, I do that now to try to prevent the second failure, but the first is done. And the discouraging thing is, okay, if you always do it right, you get no benefit, because then you are safe and you have no attacks. That's always this motivational thing why so few people care about it, because the tricky thing about and this is a difference with physical security. When someone beats you, you realize that. When someone hacks you, you probably don't realize that. At least the adversary makes a mistake. And this is why I think the general awareness of digital security is still very, very little.
Right. There was also a question by Natalia previously. She asked, what would be the actions in case a journalist's phone conversations were intercepted?
Sorry, again, what were
the actions when you mentioned, for example, that your phone has been intercepted? So what could be done?
I mean, if it happened already, then it's too late. Then these information are gone, and you don't know where they go. But
for the future,
for the future, I basically mentioned the most important thing already: end-to-end encryption. So end-to-end encryption means I have one key, you have another key, and the two of us exchange messages with each other, and no one else in this world could access it. Really, no one, even not the service provider. Let's say we use Signal, and Signal uses end-to-end encryption. It means that not even Signal itself, who hosts us and who deliver our messages, are able to intercept it. They may see that we are communicating, but they are not able to read it or to listen to it. And this is what needs to be done then. End-to-end encryption for regular phone calls like landline, telephony is technically possible, but practically not. It's super expensive. It's cost thousands of euros. No one does that. But from the popular service chat apps is a WhatsApp, Signal, and Threema do have end-to-end encryption for calls. And if you switch to that after an incident happened, your adversaries are most probably out of the game. Then they would have to hack your devices, which is a very, very advanced thing.
And concerning emails, should every journalist use encrypted emails?
It would be cool, but I don't believe in that anymore. So the technology for end-to-end encryption for emails was already released in the early 90s. It's from a technological standpoint of view, it's still secure and more or less unbreakable, practically unbreakable, but only people like me use it. and like technologists who are tech savvy, because it is still complicated. Yeah, thank you. No, it's fine. Yeah, nerds use it. Nerds use it. Yeah, it's a bit nicer. Now, I think practically more important for email is to think, okay, where is my provider based? Because I think it is good to have end-to-end encryption. For example, as an organization, have at least one account in which, for example, sources could write something. There's one email provider that offers that by default, which is ProtonMail. There are some technical downsides, so it's not the true end-to-end encryption, but it's better than nothing. And if you want to have a tool to easily set up end-to-end encryption, or the easiest way to set it up at the moment is the provider Mailvelope. I may write it down here. Mailvelope. Could you see that now?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is what you could look up there. You could install PGP. So is the technology called in your web browser. It's technically just an add-on in your web browser, like an ad blocker or something. But it sets up end-to-end encryption in like 10 minutes, I would say. Yeah, but it's not that it will never be, because email, my last point on that, email was invented in the 80s. And as the whole world uses it, this is the only reason why we use it today still, because everybody uses it. But as everybody uses it, it's so hard to change that, like technically, to make changes in the protocol of email, because it would mean that all the humans on the world using emails would like to accept, or would have to accept, yes, these new changes. And that's just not going to happen. That's why we are today, and this is so sad from a technological standpoint, we're using a technology that is technically unsecure and is 35 years old, and we as humans are just too lazy to change that email. And that's why it is so hard to put additional security on it. We all have to do that. We can't implement it in the protocol because, yeah, it's like email is too popular to change it. This is how I would call it.
But investigative reporters, I could imagine they're using it regularly.
They do it. Yeah, but so my observation from the last 2 years is that even for investigative reporters, the email becomes less and less important, and more people using messengers, because it's just more convenient. You do have like desktop applications. You can chat on your computer, you can share files, you have it on all devices, and you don't have to set any additional end-to-end security because it's just built in. It's just easier also for the sources. This is what you always have. Even if the journalists have end-to-end encryption for emails, the source needs to do that as well. And yeah, that's what most of the people are not willing to do.
But not Slack, I guess, as messenger.
There are better solutions.
Yeah, like for example?
You mean like as a
messenger, if I would like to chat with other people?
So for the messenger, I think technologically the two best ones at the moment are Signal and Wire.
Okay.
And for like Slack is like more like organizational stuff and working in a team collaboratively. Metrics is an option that has end-to-end encryption for everything. So for Slack, as far as I know, this is my last knowledge I got from that, is that they also do not plan to implement end-to-end encryption to Slack, just because the employees don't want that. The employees would like to see what their the companies would like to see what their employees are doing. And this is only possible also for the company if the service does not have end-to-end encryption.
And perhaps the last question that Petra asked, for example, half an hour ago to Maria, but perhaps you can also answer it in terms of digital security. Are journalists working for big media outlets more safe than those working on individual base or for small media outlets? What is your experience?
That's hard to say. what I could say is that it's easier for individuals to change something.
Yeah.
Because a freelancer has his or her own mail address. They has their own Facebook account and doesn't need a warrant from its boss to use a new tool. We as freelancers, or I'm freelancer as well, we can just do it on our own. While working in a big corporation with their IT department in the background that may just says and that's the reality, employees go to the IT department, hey, I would like to use end-to-end encryption for my email, and they say, no, impossible.
Impossible.
That's why I think it's at least harder for people working in big companies to do something.
And before we're coming to an end, this was really surprising for me, as you mentioned, as a last tip, hide yourself online. For example, when we are talking about freelancers, they would like to be visible on the internet. They would like to build a brand.
Of course,
so that
and they have
people
to.
do know what they stand for, what is their expertise. So how could they do it practically, hide yourself online?
I mean, practically, exactly like you say, think about what you want to have on the internet. Me, for example, I mean, I work on data protection and I only get new clients if they think, okay, this guy obviously knows what he talks about.
Yeah.
So it would be quite bad that, I don't know, my Twitter account got hacked. That's why it's super important for me, and I don't even share a lot of things on Facebook or something. But I do, for example, share a lot of things I do just for transparency reasons, so that people know where my income comes from. That's a lot of information I publish, and I wouldn't have to do it. But as you say, I need reputation. I want to be a brand. I want to stand for something. Hiding more means hiding for against the real adversaries, and that's that's threat modeling. If you are afraid of trolls who may collect everything about you, you just posted on the internet in the last 15 years, then you may think of your data health and just remove in advance a little bit of compromising things. If that's not a problem, but a state enemy is your problem, then you should have to think of technical reasons like a VPN, so that, for example, a state cannot see what you're doing on the internet.
Right.
So it is in the end always, as also was said in the previous talk, it is about risk assessment. It's about threat modeling. Really thinking, okay, is it cool what I'm doing here, or is it a danger for me? And then it's often kind of logic and easy what to do.
So it was super brief, only half an hour, but for these participants who would like to go deeper into this topic, are there any websites that you can recommend, or any books that should be read according to your point of view?
There's a lot. CPJ was mentioned. I have a background with Reporters Without Borders. We also have a website. It's called, and I wrote most of the stuff, honestly, of it. Helpdesk. I just posted here. Helpdesk.rsf.org. The colleagues from Access Now, the security helpline from Access Now, they also have a lot of information about it. Plus, what I would like also then to mention here, we as DW Akademie, I'm in a related project to your ones, as I mentioned already. We will release this threat modeling guide where you can do the threat modeling, and B, we will also release a tool that will, very briefly speaking, allow you to automate a creation of a security concept as much as possible. But this will probably only release in the second half of 2020. But the threat modeling guide is almost done.
Super. Sounds good. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you also, Maria, for your time, for your useful insights. I hope you enjoyed our third webinar session organized by DW Akademie. And thank you also for your questions. There will come 3 other webinars next year, the next one previously in January, and I hope to see you next time. So take care and goodbye. Thank you.